I recently heard a story, it's a parable really, of a man who was being pursued through the jungle by a tiger. And the tiger was catching up with him, and it was a mountainous area. And he was running and running through the jungle. He got to the edge of the forest. There was a clear bit. He ran towards that. He discovered that there was a sheer cliff, and there was a single tree growing near to the lip of the cliff. The tiger was coming faster and faster after him. And so he climbed up the tree and then along a branch that actually went out over this very, very deep ravine. He was panicking because he was sure that this tiger was the tiger that was good at climbing trees. And sure enough, the tiger was waiting at the bottom, preparing its move. And so the man out on his branch looked up into the sky and said, "Is there anyone there who can help me?" And he heard a voice, and the voice came down from the sky and said, "Yes, I can help you. All you need to do is to let go of the branch, and my hands will catch you." The tiger was beginning to climb the tree, and the man didn't have very much time to think about anything, but he did pause, and then he paused again. He didn't look down, and then he did look down, and it was very difficult, and he didn't want to let go, and so he looked up again into the sky, and he said, "Is there anyone else who can help me?" All of us who are believers in the Lord Jesus Christ have been brought to a point where we were desperate for some sort of help, and yet not quite wanting to let go and let God help us. And yet he has brought us to realise that the tiger of our predicament will otherwise catch up with us. And so he's led us to place our faith in the Lord Jesus Christ, to let go of whatever else we might be holding on to that we might think would save us, and to entrust ourselves to the loving arms of Christ. And it doesn't just happen once. It's a process and a cycle that we go through repeatedly as our Christian lives develop and unfold. In this psalm, where do you think David is at the moment of writing? If you look at the early verses, they're in the past tense. He speaks of having waited for the Lord and how God had lifted him up, and how, verse 3, God had put a new song in his mouth. This is past tense. That's not where David is at the moment. It's what comes first, and we'll look at the reason for that in a moment, but this is past. Where is he at the moment? For that, you have to go through almost to the central verses of the psalm, verses 11 and 12. "Do not withhold your mercy from me, Lord," he says. "May your love and faithfulness always protect me." Now he's begging for mercy in the present and in the future. But then he comes right into his own presence and what an awful present it is. Look at verse 12. "Troubles without number surround me." Suppose you really hate ants, and one ant freaks you out. One ant is a massive trouble to you. David is surrounded by 1,000,000 ants. That's where he's at. "My sins have overtaken me," he says. So the wrong things that he's done are like a very fast car on the motorway, perhaps even a motorway police patrolman, and you're in a fairly slow car, and the patrolman catches up with you. And there's a kind of blue flashing light. All the wrong things you've done are flashing in your face. You feel the arm of the law coming down upon you. And he just can't see his way through life. It feels as though everything around him is like being in a fog. You know how it is? Sometimes in the autumn in Cambridge, the fog comes down. You can hardly see very far through it. That's where he's at. He even describes the sins as being more than the hairs he has on his head. And inside, he's just completely losing it. This is his present. But we only discover that when we read through the psalm and then we look at it as a whole. Because where he starts is in the past. Now, some people have said that the psalm is just two different things that have been bolted together in a rather unfortunate way, like the front half of a car and the back half of the car that don't belong together. But I think David was a bit brighter than that. It makes him out to be a bit of a twit. I think something very profound is being said to us as we read through the psalm and then we reread it. We realise that he is speaking from a situation of the collapse of his inner hope and his morale about himself and about his future. He has enemies on the outside, he has enemies on the inside, and he's at his wit's end. But where does he start? He starts by recalling a time when he waited for God and he begged God for help and God delivered him. Think about that for a moment. He starts by activating his memory, by actively remembering what God has done. I found myself in a situation a couple of months ago where I had something coming up that was really freaking me out and making me think, I can't cope with this. This is beyond me. It was really getting me down. I felt this great sort of weight upon my soul inside. And then I suddenly remembered that I'd been through something similar a few years before and I'd felt the same way and God had got me through it. And it was that memory that God had got me through it that really just changed the whole thing. I think David goes back to a memory of where God had helped him. And that's in verses 1 to 3. He'd had a time when it was as though he was stuck in the muck, trying to make progress forward, but no kind of traction for his shoes or his feet on the mud of his situation. And it was just like a pit in which you're sinking deeper and deeper. He had to wait and he had to ask God to help. He had to cry out to God, and God did deliver him. If we're Christians, we can all think of specific ways in our past where God has helped us. And above all, the greatest way in which he's helped us, in delivering us from our sin and bringing us to know him and bringing us forgiveness. If you're anywhere near where David was when he wrote this, if you have that sense of troubles outside you, like fierce poison ants or whatever freaks you out, if you have that sense of your heart giving way within you, if you have that sense that there are external troubles, but there are internal troubles and the problems that I've caused for myself because I'm such a failure and because I keep sinning, if you're anywhere near that, let David say to you, you need to go back in your memory and remember how God has helped you. Let's take a short break, and you may like to think about this during the break. See you in a moment. So the situation is that David is in dire straits. Enemies on the inside, enemies on the outside. But he forces himself to recall what God did. And then he recalls the effect it had on him. Verse 3, he put a new song into my mouth. His sense of just being lost and being stuck is replaced by rejoicing, this song that God has given him, a hymn of praise to God. Something that other people can hear about and be blessed by. Many will see and fear the Lord and put their trust in him. It leads him into a reflection that this is a general principle, not just for him, but for other people. Blessed is the one who trusts in the Lord, who doesn't look to the proud, to those who turn aside to false idols, who doesn't look to help from the wrong places, from people who are not part of God's kingdom and God's work, but looks to God. There is a great blessedness in that. As we look back on the way God has saved us, we then remember the joy that gave us, and that sense that, yes, this is the way to live. If you trust in the Lord, you're blessed. Now, this hasn't taken the sins and the troubles and the deadly poison ants away, but it does change some of our feelings about our situation. Look, he remembers the hope that God had given him through this experience. He speaks of the wonders that God has done, verse 5, and then the wonders of the things that are planned. Past and present, if you see it this way through the eyes of faith, is a series of events in which God rescues us. That's the way to see your life. Not as a series of bad luck events, not as a series of near scrapes, not as a series of times when you've got yourself out of a situation or someone else has, but times in which God himself has allowed you to go into a pit and then brought you out and given you something even better than what you thought you'd lost. And then in the process of his recall, he remembers the way that he presented himself to God. And this is very interesting, and this is a bit different and a bit denser than we might expect. And there are some surprises here in verses 6 to 8. Because there is a kind of commitment here that comes after the experience of the salvation. Sacrifice and offering you did not desire, he says. So although the offerings of the bulls and goats in the temple had their purpose, they were not enough. My ears you've opened. Instead, God has done something in him, he says, that's made him available in some way to listen. Again, he says, burnt offerings and sin offerings you do not require. They were not the main thing. And then he recalls the way he presented himself to God. Here I am. I have come. It is written about me in the scroll. This is very strange. Would we be saying this sort of thing? I mean, well, what kind of sense does it make for us to say, I'm come, it's written about me in the scroll, Lord? Now, at this point, we need to remember that David was the king. We've already seen signs of that in the way that when he rejoiced, other people saw it. He was prominent. He had a leadership role. And if you are a leader, you will be put in a place where the Lord has to lead you out of a slimy pit so that you can testify to that, so the people who follow you, the people you're responsible for, will rejoice too. And God will make you an example of that. Utterly sure and non-negotiable for all Christian leaders. And so David is acting as the leader of the people. But written about me in the scroll? He almost seems to be saying that he is the one in whom the salvation centres. I desire to do your will, my God. Your law is within my heart. And at one level, yes, when we've been saved, we do consecrate ourselves utterly to God. And David is acting like any disciple, any follower of Christ should do, saying, yes, of course, I've trusted you. You've rescued me. Now I want to follow you. But there's something more going on here. And we realise that when we look at the way that the New Testament uses this passage. Because in Hebrews chapter 10, the writer picks up verses 6 to 8, and he says, actually, these things were not totally fulfilled in any Old Testament human being, any ordinary disciple. They weren't fulfilled in King David himself even. They were fulfilled in the Lord Jesus Christ. As Jesus came to make a sacrifice that all the bulls and goats could never make, in our place. A man dying for men and women, a human being dying for humanity. As we see the Lord Jesus Christ, written about in the scroll, predicted from the Old Testament, coming and being totally available for God to procure salvation for us. Now we as disciples say, oh Lord, work in you, work in me, I want to do your will, I offer you myself, but it's always incomplete. It's never 100%. There's always something within us that resists that, and certainly once we get beyond the prayer, there are things within us that stop us fulfilling it wholeheartedly. We never get to that point, but Jesus did. Think of him in the garden, not my will, but yours be done, presenting himself 100% available, 100% willing to do God's will to save us. Now, we're a long way away from the billion poison ants, and the flashing lights of the sins that are overtaking us on the motorway. And yet we're not. Because when we recall that Jesus has done something none of us can do, there is the most amazing sense of relief. You've got someone playing in a football game and they're in the starting 11, but actually they're just not very good. Maybe they're not very good at all. Maybe they're not very good on the day. And at half time, the manager brings on a substitute, and everyone knows that the substitute is better than the person who started, and the substitute scores the winning goal. The Lord Jesus Christ is our substitute. We try and play on the pitch, but we can't score the goal of salvation. We can't die for our own sins. He does that for us. We had an issue at home with our cooker, and we've had to get someone in, and that someone is going to come back. I can't mend the cooker. I haven't got the parts. I wouldn't even know how to diagnose it, but I trust this guy. He's been before. He's mended it before. I trust him to come and do it for me. The Lord Jesus Christ has come and done it for us. Let's take a short break again, and you may want to think about that, and think about the remembrance of being brought out of a slimy pit into a solid place through Christ. All that implies and how it focuses on him. See you in a moment.